When I stepped into that vast, ice-cold mansion that day, I thought I'd been invited merely to sign a will. I could never have imagined that in the midst of that narcissistic family, the dreadful secret they'd kept from me for 30 long years would strike me across the face like a slap. By the time I learned that everything had been a lie, it was already far too late.
It had been barely a week since my late brother Kenneth's funeral when his family, his pretentious wife Lorraine, and their spoiled son Simon summoned me to that dreadful house for the reading of his will. They knew very well that without my presence, they couldn't touch a single penny of that damned inheritance. Kenneth had always been a man intoxicated by control. All his life, he wielded money like a weapon, manipulating everyone around him, especially me, because of the small shares I'd inherited from our father's company. He'd turned that arrogance into a family creed, teaching his wife and son to live without love, guided only by greed. So in that house, everyone had long since turned into statues of ice, thinking only of themselves. From the moment I entered the drawing room, neither Lorraine nor Simon bothered to lift their heads to greet me. In their eyes, I was still the family's embarrassment, the poor relation in modest clothes, the one who could never match their polished facades and luxury. When the solicitor, Mr. Martin, walked in with a thick folder and took his seat opposite us, the tightening in my stomach wasn't from some pitiful hope of inheritance. It was the dreadful instinct that something buried for 30 years, something to do with those papers Kenneth once forced me to sign without ever explaining, was about to surface. As Mr. Martin cleared his throat and opened the file, the fake air of mourning in the room evaporated, replaced by pure, hungry anticipation. It felt as though no one there was holding their breath for the dead, but for the numbers about to be read aloud. Lorraine, draped in her usual cloud of expensive perfume, broke her proud posture for just a second, her eyes fixed on the solicitor's lips as though they were a treasure map. Her son, Simon, looked bored, eager for the formalities to end so he could drift back into his fantasies of yachts and luxury cars. And me, I could think of only one thing. With those same fragile yellow documents my brother made me sign all those years ago when I was still too young to understand anything, be pulled from that file today? The solicitor read through the routine part first, the mansion to Lorraine, the cash and vehicles to Simon. But just as that triumphant smile began to settle on Lorraine's face, he paused. From the folder, he withdrew a sealed, time-worn envelope, its wax insignia half faded. However, Mr. Martin's grave voice cut through the room, the validity of Mr. Kenneth's will depends upon this additional protocol and upon the conditions of a confidentiality and waiver agreement signed exactly 30 years ago between Mr. Kenneth and Miss Grace. At that moment, Lorraine's smile froze and I felt the ground give way beneath my feet.
The very instant my sister-in-law Lorraine heard the words confidentiality agreement, the elegant, aristocratic mask she'd worn for years cracked and fell away. What stared back from beneath it was something raw and ugly, greed itself. She glared at the solicitor as though she might strangle him where he sat, for the idea that her late husband's fortune could hinge on the signature of someone as insignificant as me was her worst nightmare. My idle nephew Simon, whose greatest achievement had been spending his father's money, leapt to his feet the moment he realized words like agreement and protocol might threaten his lavish lifestyle. What agreement? What secret? What's this woman got to do with our money? He roared, as if my very presence contaminated what he believed was rightfully his. I, meanwhile, sat frozen. The yellowed envelope on the table seemed almost alive, like a coiled serpent waiting to strike. My brother's voice echoed faintly in my mind. Not a word, Grace. This is for everyone's good. I could almost see him again, pressing those papers toward me all those years ago, my hand trembling as I signed something I didn't understand. Lorraine soon gathered herself and marched toward the solicitor, shouting, "This is absurd, Mr. Martin. My husband would never have agreed to such nonsense. This is some scheme she's invented." The solicitor's professional politeness vanished, replaced by an icy gravity. "Mrs. Lorraine," he said, raising his hand for silence, "this envelope has remained sealed in a bank vault for 30 years. The late Mr. Kenneth left explicit instructions. It was to be opened only if Miss Grace was present and you attempted to contest the will." In that instant, I began to understand. My brother had planned all of this. When Mr. Martin finally broke the crimson wax seal, the faint crack echoed through the room like a cannon blast. My heart hammered so violently I feared it might burst from my chest and expose the panic I could barely contain. Moments ago, Lorraine and Simon had mocked me. Now they stared, motionless, their eyes fixed on that fragile slip of paper as if it held the key to their entire fortune. The solicitor unfolded a single, time-stained page, its surface covered in my brother's familiar, sharp handwriting. Even its smell, dry and old, seemed to drag the weight of that long-buried day back into the room. Then, in his deep and resonant voice, Mr. Martin began to read aloud. "This will has but one condition: the debt owed to my sister Grace for the great sacrifice she made 30 years ago to preserve our family's honor must be repaid in full." The words sacrifice and debt seemed to hang in the air. I heard Lorraine hiss, "What on earth is he talking about? What honor?" But my mind had already slipped away, back to that dark day when my brother locked me in a room and slid those blank sheets before me, commanding silence in the name of family. The moment my sister-in-law Lorraine heard my brother use the word sacrifice in reference to me, she threw aside her pretense of grief and sprang to her feet, shouting, "What sacrifice? The only thing this woman has ever done is live off what my father-in-law left and drain my husband's fortune." Her words cut through me like a blade. I wanted to scream the truth, that it had been the opposite. After our father's death, Kenneth had taken the little shop and the small house left to me, all under the pretense of protecting the family's reputation. He made me live in his home like a servant and kept me silent with guilt. My nephew Simon, emboldened by his mother's venom, joined in. "She's right. What would you know of sacrifice? You must have manipulated my father in his old age to add something to the will." He shot the solicitor a scornful look, as though demanding that this nonsense be ended at once. But Mr. Martin, the solicitor, only raised a calm hand toward Lorraine and said, in a tone of composed authority, "If you'll permit me, Mrs. Lorraine, I'll continue reading what the late Mr. Kenneth meant by the debt and what exactly Miss Grace relinquished." Then his voice shifted, clear, deliberate, carrying the weight of the moment. Clause 2 of the protocol. My sister Grace hereby agrees, at her brother's request, to relinquish all her original shares in our family business, shares that were part of our father's estate. At that, Lorraine's breath caught. When the words original shares and relinquish left the solicitor's mouth, I watched the color drain from her proud face. For the first time in 30 years, the great lie, the myth that her husband had built his empire alone, began to crumble right before everyone's eyes. It was a small, bittersweet comfort for the silence I had carried all these years. Lies, all of it, Lorraine hissed, her voice trembling. In her world, the thought that someone like me could have been the true foundation of the fortune she worshipped was not merely offensive, it was unbearable. Her eyes no longer said, "How could you do this?" but, "How could you hide this from us?" What she never knew was that when our father died, Kenneth was already on the brink of bankruptcy. To save the company, he needed my share, those valuable lands and the cash my father had left me. That day, when he made me sign the papers, he promised me, "It's only a trust, Grace. You're doing this so our family survives." Mr. Martin ignored Lorraine's frantic denials and continued reading from the brittle page in his hand. The shares my sister transferred to me without payment form the foundation of my present wealth. This was not a sale, but a trust. When the word trust rang out, it exploded through the room like a gunshot. Even Simon's smug expression dissolved into shock. Then Mr. Martin lifted his eyes from the page and for the first time looked straight at me as he read the final line. When the solicitor's final words, with full legal interest from the entirety of the estate, echoed off the walls of that grand sitting room, I felt the air itself vanish. Time seemed to stop. Lorraine and Simon sat frozen, as though they had just heard their own death sentences. My spoiled nephew was the first to grasp what 30 years of legal interest truly meant. His face turned a ghastly shade as he stammered, "That's impossible. 30 years of interest. That's everything. There'll be nothing left for us." When the shock finally gave way to rage, Lorraine screamed, "Fraud! My husband would never do this to me." She lunged at the document, tearing at it with shaking hands, unable to accept that the mountain of wealth she'd built her life upon had grown from the tiny hill I once entrusted to my brother, and that it now belonged, once again, to me. While they fought for their money, only one thought consumed me. Kenneth's words from that long ago day. "I'll never leave you helpless, Grace. This will be your insurance." Only now did I realize that his insurance had been a quiet act of justice, a carefully set trap for his narcissistic family, one that took 30 years to spring. Mr. Martin, the solicitor, calmly caught Lorraine's arm before she could damage the fragile document. With practiced precision, he placed it safely aside and opened another folder from his case. "Here is the independent audit report, Mrs. Lorraine," he said evenly. "The principal amount of the trust, plus 30 years of statutory interest, now exceeds the total value of your current assets." Simon snatched the pages with trembling hands. As his eyes ran down the columns of numbers, I saw the horror dawn on him. The luxury cars, the limitless credit cards, the endless holidays, all evaporating before his eyes. Those sheets of paper were nothing less than the bankruptcy notice of his entitled future. Lorraine, who had spent her life crushing others under the weight of her husband's name, seemed to collapse in on herself. When she realized that even the mansion she sat in was no longer hers, her proud posture deflated like a punctured balloon, and she sank into the chair, empty, silent, spent. As for me, after years of humiliation, years of being treated as the poor relation, pitied and dismissed by those who had stolen my life, I could barely breathe at the scale of my brother's final design. I had thought myself the victim all along, but in truth, he had made me the most powerful person in that house. Then Simon, ever his mother's son, recovered just enough to smirk. With a saccharine tone and a rehearsed grin, he turned toward me and said, "Auntie Grace, dear aunt, surely father was only joking. You wouldn't hold this against us, would you? You'll just tear those papers up, won't you?" Even Lorraine, moments earlier seething with hatred, now joined his performance, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "Grace, my dear sister-in-law," she pleaded, her voice quivering, "we've always been family. Don't do this. For Kenneth's sake, don't let the family fall apart." For the first time in her life, she called me dear. Watching those two, who had treated me like the poor relation, who had refused to meet my eyes, suddenly transform into pitiful, cloying, darling aunt and dear sister-in-law, the moment their money was at risk, was stomach-turning theater. To them, the word family had always meant whoever held the keys to the safe. I lifted my head slowly and for the first time looked at them not with pity, but with clear knowing. I broke the silence I had carried for decades. "Which family are you talking about, Lorraine? The one that turned me away at every holiday door? The one that didn't invite me to Simon's wedding for fear I'd embarrass you? Where were you on the nights I shivered alone after my husband died, reading about the lavish parties you threw in newspapers?" I asked. "Where were you when my nephew Simon told me, 'You live off my father's charity,' the day I thanked Kenneth for helping with my bills?" Lorraine's fake tears dried instantly when she realized the purse tap was shutting off. She stepped forward with the most vicious edge of her narcissism and spat. "Ungrateful woman. So this has been your plan all along. You waited for my husband to die so you could swoop in and take everything." Something that had slept in me for 30 years woke at that moment, and I stood up. The shaken, trembling old woman was gone. In a voice as cold as cut glass, I said, "I am not here to prey on anyone's property, Lorraine. I have come only to reclaim the trust you've been using without permission, what was mine all along." My use of the word trust pushed Lorraine's last defenses to breaking point. She laughed a hysterical, venomous laugh. "What trust? There is no document. This is just your word. You tricked my husband." In that instant, I remembered years of her poisonous sneers and felt none of the fear I once would have. Simon, realizing brute force and insults wouldn't work, grabbed his phone and began screaming about forgery and fraud. His fingers trembled over the numbers as he dialed, each shaky press a sign that his only power, his father's money, was no longer guaranteed. While Simon ranted, Mr. Martin took a steady breath, as if this moment had been staged for him 30 years ago. He placed one last file on the table, an older, more official document than the protocol Lorraine had just torn to pieces. This, his voice was clinical and unyielding, is the notarized transfer recorded in the Commercial Gazette 30 years ago, showing that Miss Grace conveyed as a trust and without payment the shares constituting 60% of the company, shares bequeathed to her from our father to her brother, Mr. Kenneth. I will never forget the color that drained from Lorraine's face then, a terrible, bruised purple. That paper proved not only my truth, but that for 30 years she had sat like a queen on money that was never hers. That realization was a humiliation worse than bankruptcy.
As Lorraine stared at the bold 60% stamped on that notarized transfer, she was not looking at a share certificate. She was watching the ruin of everything she had cherished: her status as Mrs. Lorraine, her grand fortune, her proud manner. The terrible realization that her entire life of splendor rested on money that actually came from me hit her like an earthquake. My spoiled nephew, Simon, who had just been threatening to call his solicitor and shouting forgery, sagged into his chair when he saw that official transfer. The signatures on that document were a death note for the life he expected to inherit without ever lifting a finger. They showed in cold ink that his glittering future and easy comforts could vanish in an instant. After the hysteria and the loud threats, a silence fell over the room heavier than any grave. There was nothing left for them to bargain with, no lines to rehearse, no roles to play. Their narcissistic world had crumbled, and they lay trapped beneath the rubble. As I looked at these two ruined people, I finally understood why my brother had waited 30 years, why he had chosen the word trust, why he had planned everything with such precision. He knew his wife and son well. He knew their boundless greed, and he used his final act to turn me, the one they had scorned, into their strongest shield. Mr. Martin gathered the papers and packed them into his heavy case. For the first time, he ignored Lorraine and Simon entirely and addressed me with a respectful, steady voice. "The protocol and the transfer are explicit, Miss Grace. The late gentleman's trust with accrued interest is now legally yours. We'll need your signature to complete the transfer of assets." When he offered me the heavy silver fountain pen, my hand hesitated. The ink of that pen would not just mark a page, it would rewrite 30 years of a life surrendered under my brother's pressure, years lived beneath their contempt, my lost youth and dignity restored by a few strokes. Lorraine made one last desperate move. "Grace, our home, Kenneth's memory," she whispered, the tremor in her voice only thinly masking the old arrogance. "How dare you take what is mine?" She had forgotten that the house she sat in and the memory she invoked had been paid for with money that once belonged to me. Simon no longer screamed or threatened. He sat with his head in his hands, faced with the truth that his father's fortune was, in fact, his aunt's trust. The sight of him,
A man raised in unearned privilege, confronting real loss, was a portrait of someone meeting reality for the first time. I thought not of Lorraine's pleading, nor Simon's collapse. I thought of Kenneth's words from long ago. "This is your insurance, Grace. Never let them grind you down." I gripped the pen and buried 3 decades of silence, humiliation, and pain into the signature I placed upon that paper. The moment my name met the ink, more than money changed hands in that icy room. The false authority they had exercised over me, their entitlement to belittle me, their poisonous pride, all of it crumbled beneath that single drop of ink and was gone forever.
When I set the pen down and felt the weight of 30 years lift from my shoulders, something inside me shifted. The timid, crushed woman who had lived beneath their contempt vanished. In her place stood someone who had finally reclaimed what was rightfully hers, what she had earned and sacrificed for. Lorraine, who had spent years playing the grand lady and patronizing me, realized with that last drop of ink that her power was gone. Her screams and threats died away. All that remained was a pitiable woman sitting in a house that was no longer hers, eyes hollow with shock. My spoiled, swaggering nephew Simon had no lawyer to call now, no fortune to hide behind. For the first time, he saw his mother defeated, and clad in his expensive clothes without his father's money, he looked small and helpless. He whispered my name, "Auntie," as if asking for permission to accept the world he'd never earned. Mr. Martin closed his folders with the respectful air of someone witnessing a coronation. Then he looked to me and asked, "The legal authority now rests with you, Miss Grace. What are your first instructions regarding the management of the estate?" In that instant, I felt the balance of power in the room shift completely. I glanced at Lorraine and Simon, who had treated me as a guest in my own life for 30 years, and answered Mr. Martin with a calm, irrevocable tone. "Please initiate the necessary legal processes immediately to have these 2 guests vacate my house within 24 hours. Hearing the words guests and 24 hours, Lorraine snapped out of her stunned daze as if a wounded animal had leapt up. You can't evict us from my home, my husband's home." Simon, who'd been frozen by the prospect of bankruptcy, rallied to his mother's pleas. "Auntie Grace, please, have mercy. Where will we go? Are you trying to throw us into the street?" he begged, playing the only part he knew, victim. Their venomous words and Simon's false humility had broken me once, many times before, but after that signature, they were as hollow as rain running down a pane of glass. They had no power over me any longer. Mr. Martin, seeing Lorraine's anger teeter towards something dangerous, intervened calmly. "Mrs. Lorraine, please be calm. Miss Grace is the lawful owner of this property and has the right to request you vacate within 24 hours. If you resist, we will have you removed by the police." The mention of police finally toppled Lorraine's last defense. Her knees gave way, and she slumped against Simon like a ruined statue. In that moment it was clear the game was over.
In my brother's 30-year chess match, I had declared checkmate, and they had nowhere left to run.
As Simon struggled to lift his mother, hanging from his arm like a discarded rag, I watched Lorraine's empty eyes wander across the room to the furniture she had worshipped, the chandeliers she had boasted of. In that vacant stare was the pain of a queen watching her 30-year reign collapse with a single signature. On the marble floor of that grand hall, mother and son, one bent under defeat, the other expelled from the house he had ruled like a prince, shuffled past me in silence. Lorraine tried, for a final moment, to throw me one of her venomous glares, but the fire in her eyes had died, leaving only the pale ash of helplessness. Simon, his head bowed for the first time in his life, stared down at his polished Italian shoes as he passed me, and in that moment I realized what I felt was not vengeance. It was justice, long delayed, inevitable, divine. My brother's promise had finally come true before my eyes. When Mr. Martin opened the great carved wooden door for them and the narcissistic pair walked out without looking back, leaving the palace they had once called home as unwelcome guests, I could swear the very walls exhaled. The air, once heavy and suffocating, felt clean again. As the door closed with a deep, final thud, the echoes of false laughter, imperious orders, and poisonous whispers vanished with it. Alone with the solicitor, I felt the weight of silence settle around me. Not emptiness, but freedom. That silence was louder than Lorraine's hysteria or Simon's threats. It was the sound of my own existence reclaiming space after 30 years of being drowned out. When Mr. Martin locked his briefcase and turned to me, the look in his eyes was no longer pity for the poor relation. It was respect. The gaze one gives to the rightful owner of an empire, to a new employer. My eyes drifted to my late brother's portrait on the wall. His stern face seemed softer now. I understood that the legacy he left me was never just about wealth or property. He had known the greed of his wife and son too well, and in the end, he had given me not only my inheritance, but my deliverance. I walked slowly through the room I had once been afraid even to enter, touching the velvet chairs, the cold marble tables, as if to confirm that this was real. The house no longer felt like a monument to arrogance. It was now a monument to endurance, to sacrifice repaid. When Mr. Martin said, "I'll oversee the remaining procedures myself, Miss Grace. You may rest now in your home," and took his leave, I remained alone in that vast mansion. Yet, for the first time in 30 years, solitude did not mean fear. It meant peace, pure, priceless peace.
When the solicitor left, a strange, almost deafening silence fell over the great house. A silence so pure it felt foreign. For the first time in 30 years, I could hear my own thoughts. The toxic whispers of Lorraine, the arrogant laughter of Simon gone. It was both terrifying and peaceful, as though the very air had forgotten how to tremble in their presence. For years I had drifted through these corridors like a shadow,
afraid even of the echo of my own footsteps, forever expecting Lorraine's sharp voice to cut through the air. Now I walk the cold marble halls slowly, touching the antique furniture and gilded frames I had once been forbidden even to dust. Every inch of this place that had once treated me as a guest now belonged to me. Every corner a monument to the sacrifices they'd built their fortune upon. When I stopped at the entrance to the grand kitchen, I remembered the years Lorraine had tossed me leftovers there, the holidays when I'd been told to eat with the staff while the guests feasted upstairs. But as I rested my hand on the icy marble counter, those memories lost their sting. The humiliation no longer owned me. Surrounded by gold-trimmed furniture and priceless antiques, I understood again that none of this cold luxury had ever been what I wanted. What I had longed for was something far simpler, the peace of drinking a cup of coffee in my own home, without their shadows looming over me. That was the true inheritance Kenneth had left me, the means to buy back peace. In the center of the sitting room stood Lorraine's throne, the velvet chair no one else was ever allowed to touch. I walked to it and sat down, pressing my full weight into its softness. For the first time in that house, I didn't cry. Instead, a tired but liberating smile spread across my face. The next morning, when the 24-hour deadline expired, a battered moving van, not a chauffeur-driven car, arrived at the grand front gates. Watching it park where luxury sedans once gleamed was proof enough. The fall of that narcissistic dynasty had been swift and pitiful. The same woman who had screamed ungrateful at me, certain she could never be cast out of her husband's home, now stood outside in disarray, her hair wild, her face bare, pleading with the movers not to mishandle her remaining possessions. She looked so small, so emptied, that I could feel no hatred for her anymore. My spoiled nephew Simon, who had never lifted a hand in his life, struggled to carry his designer luggage himself. It wasn't the physical strain that broke him. It was the dawning awareness that he would now have to live without the cushion of other people's money. Even the keys to their precious cars had to be surrendered to the firm's representative. Company property, not personal. It was Lorraine's final loss of status, the last jewel of her imagined crown stripped away. I watched as they stepped out of the gates, climbing into an ordinary taxi. No driver, no entourage, no audience. As the wrought iron doors closed behind them, I felt no triumphal cheer rise in me. Only silence, deep, calm, conclusive. The kind of silence that follows the end of a very long war. When the last shadow of that narcissistic family vanished through the doorway, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. It wasn't peace, not yet, but the heavy quiet of realization. I looked around and understood that I had never wanted this mansion, this cold luxury. These walls didn't speak of triumph. They whispered of 30 years spent beneath Lorraine's arrogance, of my brother's clever but cruelly intricate trap. Every object I touched, every chair I sat on still carried traces of their false laughter, their shallow lives. Though they had been bought with my money, these things belonged to Lorraine's greed, not to my soul. I knew then that I could never breathe freely in this golden tomb, not for a single day. The wealth my brother had left me was meant to be the key to my freedom, not the walls of a new prison. And so, in that moment, I made a decision more important than the one I had made 30 years ago when I signed away my shares. I would take back control of my life completely. When I called Mr. Martin again, my voice no longer carried exhaustion, but the calm certainty of a woman who finally knows what she wants. "Mr. Martin," I said, "I want you to sell the mansion, every last trace of what belonged to that narcissistic family. I don't need the money, I need the peace it can buy." As I walked out of that grand doorway for the last time, I carried only a small suitcase. I was leaving behind the house, the lies, the pain, and for the first time in 30 years, I knew where I belonged. I didn't need gilded furniture or marble floors. All I needed was the scent of the sea and a warm cup of coffee in the morning. With a small portion of what had once been my entrusted fortune, I bought a modest home by the Aegean where I could breathe the salt air and watch the sunlight pour into my room each day. And I learned that true wealth isn't gold ceilings, it's the peace of opening a window without fear. Mr. Martin later told me that Lorraine and Simon had lost everything. The debts of their opulent life and the legal compensations from Kenneth's will had stripped them bare. Simon now sat at a desk working for the first time in his life. Lorraine had faded into the anonymity of an ordinary existence, her title of Lady of the House gone forever. As for the rest of the fortune, I gave it away to foundations that help women like me, women silenced and diminished by their families, and to orphan girls who dream of an education. I didn't want to carry the weight of that money. I wanted it to become light, to illuminate other lives. After 30 years of silence, I finally understood something profound. Narcissistic people punish you not with cruelty, but with belief. The belief that you are worth less than you are. Yet their pride, their towering egos, are only veils for their own fear. And when the wind of justice blows, those veils always lift. Now, in the final chapter of my life, I no longer look back at that house or the pain it held. I look out at this endless blue sea, and I finally understand why my brother wrote "trust" on that faded envelope. He hadn't just returned my fortune, he had given me back my freedom, my dignity, and the quiet knowledge of my own worth.